He's not going to give up Russian influence and power in Ukraine easily. He's made that clear over the past 10 years. He did nothing during the Trump administration that looked anything like that. And now we have this under President Biden. And I saw you had called attention to this tweet by then candidate Joe Biden, which really does sort of belie the reality of those two events as I just laid them out. This is from February of 2020. Biden, then candidate Biden, tweeting out, Vladimir Putin doesn't want me to be president. He doesn't want me to be our nominee. If you're wondering why, it's because I'm the only person in this field who's ever gone toe to toe with him. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's nonsense. My colleague Jim Geraghty at National Review said earlier that he was trying to sound like John Wayne. Of course, it didn't work because it's based on nothing. And again, this is a good example of a tendency within the United States to view everything that happens on the world stage as an extension of our domestic politics. Donald Trump said some pretty terrible things about Vladimir Putin. And there's a famous moment with Bill O'Reilly where Bill O'Reilly says, well, he's a killer. And Vladimir Putin, Trump says, is not so bad. Because we have killers here too. We're not so innocent, I think were his exact words. That was a terrible thing to say, but there's no real evidence beyond that Donald Trump was weak on Russia. In fact, Trump sent more arms to the countries that are threatened by Russia than did Barack Obama. And so what Joe Biden was trying to do there is play off this conception that Trump was Putin's puppet, and that what we really needed in the White House was a guy who would stand up to him. Of course, that's not really how this works. And even if Joe Biden does a good job in responding to Russian aggression, he's still going to be somewhat hamstrung. We're not going to go to war with Russia. We will be able to maneuver, maybe send weapons, maybe impose more sanctions, maybe deploy some troops to make sure this doesn't spiral out of control. But I don't really know what Biden means when he says, well, I'm the one who went toe-to-toe with him. That's just not how the Russians think.
Yeah, he's trying to sound tough. And even now, the word invasion, which the White House was reluctant to use, comes from some low-level person in the PR shop who I've never even heard of. It's not the president saying that, at least not yet. It's like 14th man in charge at the PR shop has called it an invasion. The Ukrainians aren't calling it that. We've been threatening, these severe sanctions over and over, but we haven't unleashed them, even though Putin's been upping his game and upping his game. Now we'll see whether Biden does it today. But, one does wonder whether Biden and his administration are somehow, I don't want to use the term enjoying this controversy, but he certainly does tout it every other day as tomorrow's the day. Putin's invading tomorrow. He's going to invade tomorrow. And it's this week for sure. It's tomorrow, whatever. And it hasn't happened thus far. And there's now speculation in the press that Biden's looking to this whole conflict as a distraction from our disastrous domestic situation back here at home.
Well, I hope he's not, because that would be genuinely appalling. And it would also be to reduce the lives and happiness of the Ukrainian people to mere domestic pawns. One of the strange things about this administration, and it's true of Joe Biden, it's also true of Kamala Harris, is their tendency to answer questions on grave topics such as these as if they were a pundit on a panel in Washington, D.C. It's fine if you are in a think tank to say you think that Putin will engage in warfare or in an invasion. It is fine if you're on a think tank to say a minor incursion might be acceptable. As an analytical matter, that may well be correct. But if you're the president of the United States, you have to talk differently. Your job is to say, no, he will not. And if he does, he will face consequences, even if those consequences are sanctions or arms exports or what you will. And both he and Kamala Harris have this strange way of separating themselves from this, of talking about it from 30,000 feet in the abstract, when in fact they are in charge of the executive branch. I wish they would stop doing that.
You had an interesting observation about Kamala Harris that I don't think is unrelated. to this discussion. And it was about a tweet she sent out. I was ripping on America again, calling us Islamophobic and anti-Semitic and all of the phobias. We have them all. Hold on. You said, okay. She put out a statement in Farsi that reads, there's segregation in America. There's xenophobia, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, homophobia, transphobia. Wherever injustice is dealt with, there is activity ahead. So I don't know what that means, first of all. What? There is activity ahead? Okay. We'll look forward to that. But I do think it sort of lays in a broader way. And here's how. We keep running around, the Democrats, trying to tell America how awful it is and how America's all these terrible things. Not only does that undermine morale here at home, right? Americans don't want to hear that over and over and over. It's not exactly a rallying cry for patriotism or the strength of our country and so on. But secondly, we seem determined to try to export those values. And it makes us into a laughingstock. You know, Saudi Arabia is not going to look at America as any stronger or as a world leader because we're flogging ourselves for being Islamophobic, or never mind any of the other things. And I think the more we try to tell the world how they need to act when it comes to, you know, political correctness or wokeness or whatever you want to call it, the more absurd we look, the less strong we look. And of course, it comes as no surprise to me that she's doing that up until this very moment.
Well, I think that it weakens us enormously because the other countries that are jockeying for world power and attention know that they can exploit these internal divisions. Now, there's no point pretending they don't exist, but one doesn't have to proactively put them out there. And I have a real problem with Kamala Harris for exactly this reason. You know me, we talked about this before. I'm a free speech absolutist. I don't want to see people prosecuted or marginalized in our society for criticizing the United States. If Kamala Harris thinks that the United States has segregation, fine. If she thinks that it's an Islamophobic, transphobic, homophobic nation, fine. But there are certain responsibilities that go with being the vice president. You don't get to just say that anymore. You have a responsibility to represent your country, to put the best foot forward. Ronald Reagan had a conception of the United States as a shining city on a hill. That doesn't mean he didn't recognize that there were problems at home. In fact, he was elected to fix some of those problems. But he understood that just as building up arms helps you win in a Cold War type scenario, so does telling the rest of the world that actually your country's great. But yes, it may have some issues, but it is a model. It is a beacon. It is a North Star. And I consider that to be the job of the president when on the foreign stage. There's no need to do it at home. I think on the merits, presidents who think the United States is a bad place are wrong. But at home, of course, they can engage more openly. Internationally, don't do it. Don't do it. It weakens us, and it shows our rivals and indeed our allies how they can divide us and how they can best use diplomacy to achieve their ends at the expense of ours.
So there's that rhetoric from our vice president. We'll hear what the president says in terms of sanctions on Russia. One does wonder if we drop the big hammer of the, quote, severe sanctions, that's the term he keeps using today, if we take it from impotent to something more severe, where do we go from there? If Putin's not done, if a full-scale invasion of, you know, the non-sort of pro-Russia areas of Ukraine happens, what's the next cudgel that we have?
I don't know. And
right? What does Joe Biden
do? Yeah, I'm not sure that he knows either. And a lot of that is not his fault. And first off, there is not, as far as I can see, a particular appetite in the United States to get into a war over Ukraine.
Right.
Irrespective of whether or not this should be the case, if Russia invaded London, I think you would see a majority in favor of the United States going in hard. Ukraine is a long, long, long way away. It is not a NATO country. It is not a country with which most Americans have any affinity. Again, I'm not endorsing this view. I'm just describing it. Second, historically, we tend to struggle when the areas in question are disputed or when there are elements within them that would actually prefer to be part of the invading force. Right. Let us dispense for a second with the idea that Vladimir Putin is Hitler, or that this crisis is the same as those that arose in the late 1930s. But as we saw then, it's tough. When Germany said, well, we want the Sudetenland because it's full of ethnic Germans, many of whom want to be German, we struggle with that because at the root of our system is consent. And we find it difficult to rationalize opposition to consent. And we're not quite sure what's true and what's not. And it divides public opinion. And I think where Putin has been clever here is, in addition to creating all sorts of pretextual reasons to go in, he's playing around with the separatist parts of Ukraine that don't actually want to be a part of Ukraine. Some of them want to be Russian.
Yeah.
And I'm not buying his reasoning, and I'm certainly not endorsing or condoning what he's doing. But in the West, we struggle with that because of our own history of self-determination.